This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning. I'm Bruce Reardon, Director of the Bay Area Climate Adaptation Network, and you are here with us for the special webinar we have this morning. We're really pleased to have three staff from the State of California Office of Emergency Services. I'm joined by Julie Norris, Sarah Risher, and Adam Sutkus, and they're going to be walking us through the Adaptation Planning Guide. And we're going to be talking on this webinar for the next hour about a major update and redo of the Adaptation Planning Guide that OES and others will be doing over the next months. And OES was very interested in getting your feedback as experienced adaptation planners and project implementers here in the Bay Area. So while they're starting to think through now what the new version of the Adaptation Planning Guide could look like, we thought it would be very timely to set up a webinar with all of you, so you, the BayCAN members, can provide some expert feedback and comment and guidance as they are starting to outline and develop the new and improved APG. So welcome to all of you. We won't do introductions here because we have a fairly good-sized crowd on the webinar, but please, as we do, get to your questions and get to the discussion later in the program, please introduce yourself then. So one request is to mute your phones so that we're not getting any background noise. That will be great. I hope you can all see my screen here with the title slide on it. The agenda is pretty straightforward. Julie and Sarah and Adam are going to tell you a bit about the Adaptation Planning Guide, give you some quick background on that, on the 2012 version, and then go into the main event here, which is the 29 major update of the APG, what the objectives are, who they're thinking about for the audience for this, and what's the timeline and process for developing the APG. And then we have a series of questions for you, to start the discussion to get your feedback. So that's our very simple agenda. I am going to advance the slide here, and let's bring in Julie Norris from the State of California Office of Emergency Services. And Julie's going to lead off in talking briefly about and giving you some background on the APG. So welcome, Julie. You're on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Bruce. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your support in this and hearing what you have to say and how you have utilized the APG in the past, or if not, what would be a good source and resources included within it that would assist you and with your local planning activities as well. I'm going to go over a little bit of background of the APG, and it's the Adaptation Planning Guide, APG, use that acronym. Back in the 2010 State Mitigation Plan, actually the state was the first one in the entire nation to include climate change within that plan, and as it so it was really a historical document and a lot of feedback, as you can imagine, from across the nation on that. But as the implementation of that plan, we developed in coordination with the Natural Resources Agency, with funding by FEMA and Energy Commission, working with Cal Poly, these 4 climate adaptation guides that we're going to discuss here. And in addition to that, there is the climate adaptation strategy, which is now developed into Safeguarding California. So it was the implementation of both the state mitigation plan and that climate adaptation strategy, where we knew then that we need to provide a resource to local jurisdictions with their planning activities, whether it be local hazard mitigation plans, or local coastal plans, or general plan updates, any of those type planning documents that would be soon incorporating, and some had already begun that process of incorporating climate into those planning activities. So So we developed with the Technical Advisory Committee these 4 guides to help the local jurisdictions back then on the best available science. Since that point in time, obviously there's been a lot more done with new climate science, and the Safeguarding California legislation definitely has moved forward in advancing and in some cases requiring climate activities to be included in your planning documents. So with SB 379 came along, that was a mandate to update the adaptation planning guides based on the Safeguarding California latest update. And so we have begun that process, and so we're just really in the forefront of that, and appreciate your information on that and feedback as well. Bruce, if you can go to the next slide, and I'll go over the 4 guides. It began with, for you watching online, the 4 adaptation guides. It starts with the APG, Planning for Adaptive Communities. So this is really the beginning, the starting place for local jurisdictions to understand climate adaptation. It gives you a step-by-step process for climate vulnerability, and moves you into going into the second guide, defining local and regional impacts. And that's really understanding that local and regional impacts, the characteristics of those, and along with the and strategy development, which goes into that understanding regional characteristics, which is the 3rd planning guide. And then followed up with, once you've identified those strategies, this 4th guide, identifying adaptation strategies, helps you implement those and what the steps you need to move forward in that. So on the slide here, we have those kind of a planning circle. And I'm not going to go through all of those steps. You can see that and see that within the guides as well. But really, these guides, each of those guides attacks one or multiple of these planning circle points. And we hope to, within Safeguarding California and the other documents that we will be coordinating with, looking at the steps, the number of steps, the regional impacts, strategies, planning tools. There's so many more available tools now, and so as you look through these documents and going through these steps, if there's practices or tools that you're aware of too that we need to incorporate, again, we will be in coordination with the 4th Climate Change Assessment, the Safeguarding California Plan, Adaptation Clearinghouse, CalAdapt. We have on OES the My Hazard and My Plan, which are mapping tools to utilize as well. And of course, all of this needs to be consistent with the State Hazard Mitigation Plan. So all of these consistencies and coordination efforts, and then with your input and the newest and available science, really not reinventing research or doing more research, because there's so much more done, and we need to update these plans, and maybe even coordinate those within 1 or 2 plans. And so getting your input is very, very important on this, and we appreciate that. At this point, we'll go now to the objectives, and I'm going to turn this over to Sarah, and Adam may chime in as well. And Sarah, go ahead, and we can start going over the objectives for this next update for the APG guides.
I think, Julie, you touched on quite a bit of these objectives, but I'll just repeat and go through the list. So our first objective, we want to equip locals and regional governments with the latest adaptation resources and planning methodologies. There's been such advancement in the adaptation space, so we want to ensure that communities are using the right thresholds and metrics when doing their assessments. And then legislation requires us to incorporate findings from the 2018 Safeguarding California Plan. We want to integrate with the Adaptation Clearinghouse. So this includes the development of an interactive web-based tool. The current APG doesn't have that, so we're really excited to come into the digital age with this tool. Then we'll also be streamlining with California's fourth climate change assessment and other state documents, as Julie mentioned. And then importantly for us, being emergency managers, we want to integrate with planning processes, particularly local hazard mitigation plans. And this will ultimately lead to funding opportunities. We can go on to the next slide. So our process and timeline, this is going to be a pretty quick project. We are, as Julie said, in the early stages, getting public outreach, or doing public outreach and getting everyone's feedback on what's needed for this update. And then in early 2019, we'll map out a content development plan with our consulting group we'll be bringing on board. And then mid-2019, we'll do a bunch of initial drafts internally that we'll review and finally release a 45-day public review draft and collect input on that and implement changes as needed, and with the goal of publishing before the close of 2019. And once we're finished with the content, we'll be able to build out our online tool. The next slide. So just some initial ideas on the content before we jump into our discussion on needs for the update. So we've been thinking that we should condense the text, combine the documents from 4 into 2 or 1. A lot in the green and purple documents, those that define and explain regional impacts. A lot of that information is in safeguarding and the fourth climate change assessment, so we don't want to be too redundant. We want to ensure that this update is focusing on adaptation strategies and methodologies and providing planning tools. And that leads to the next idea that we want to increase the adaptation strategies and resources provided, and this includes risk identification tools, assessment procedures, examples of adaptation practices and projects. There's been some really great successful ones across the state that we want to highlight. We also want to include tools for jurisdictions to conduct cost-benefit analysis. We'll have information on how to fill out a grant, where to look for grants for these projects. And also engagement tools and equity frameworks are a big thing that local jurisdictions have already asked of us to include. And then planning checklists. This could be include CEQA document or CEQA checklist, ensuring you have all the requirements met in your plan. And then the third one, we want to improve consistency among the state documents. So in the current APGs, the sectors don't align with Safeguarding California or the fourth climate change assessment. So we want to ensure that all the information is the same. And then we want to utilize the same icons and graphics for the regions and sectors that are in those other 2 state documents. And lastly, a big goal of ours is to enhance the usability. This document, the current APG, is pretty text heavy, and research shows that that's not the most user-friendly. And so we want to implement a mix of text and infographics and charts and images as well. We can move on to the next slide, Bruce. Your turn to take it away.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Julie and Adam. Great, quick run through of a big set of documents in the original APG and what you're trying to do now with the update. So now we're turning to your feedback, and we have, as we said, 4 questions for you. The first, I'll just preview it. First, a question about, have you used the APG and what was helpful, or if you didn't use it, why not? Did you not know about it or whatever? Secondly, kind of play APG leader here and say, if you were waving the magic wand, if you were in charge here of this update, what would you put in the APG? Maybe what would you take out? How would you make it most helpful to people? We're going to go back here and get some feedback as part of that question. We'll get some feedback on these initial ideas that Sarah just went over. And then the third question, what adaptation-related plans are you developing in the next few years so the APG can really target the work that you're doing? And finally, what other feedback? So let's go back to question A. You can answer the question in two ways here. Use the chat function on your keyboard here on GoToMeeting, or unmute yourself. Thank you all for muting yourselves this morning. We have quite a good crowd on the webinar. Unmute yourself, identify yourself, name, rank, and serial number, and give us your feedback. So we'll start with this first one. Have you used the Adaptation Planning Guide, the original one? If yes, how was it most helpful? What was the way that it helped you the most? Or if you didn't use it, why not? So anyone can fire away here. Just unmute yourself and give us your answer. And don't be shy.
This is Zoe, and I'll jump in to get the conversation started. So Zoe Elizabeth, Sustainability Manager with the County of Santa Clara. And yes, I have used APG when it first came out, and I used it to support a framework that was developed, a climate action framework down in Los Angeles. And it's been a little while now, but I think what I remember it being useful is really setting the context, providing the broad kind of information and link to all of the resources that go into adaptation planning. So it helped to make sure that we were consistent with efforts that were happening at the state level, and also that we, had like a jump into what the best practices were. And yeah, I think that's
great. Thank
it.
you.
Okay.
Thank you, Zoe. So unmute yourself now, or mute yourself now. Thank you. Others that would like to weigh in on this first question? And you can go yes or no here. If you didn't use the APG, tell us why. Tell us it was too big. Tell us you didn't know about it. Tell us whatever would be relevant here for understanding, again, how we're going to get people to not only know about the APG, but actually use it the second time.
Bruce, can you hear me?
Yes, Michael.
This is Michael with San Mateo County. So I work on the policy side or more. Obviously, you know, Bruce, with the supervisor Pine, who's sort of been a leader in this. It's possible that our Office of Sustainability have used this document before. I'm not sure. I can't say I've gone through it in depth. The issue that we're facing, because we've done a lot of our own assessments internally in the county, is we're more in the phase of how do we implement things. So we're kind of done with studies and analysis, and we're at the point where we have to figure out, okay, we know there's a problem, we know we have to do things. It's extremely expensive to do the planning, let alone the actual building of things. So I guess the broad question I would ask the state is, this is great to have this guidance, but how do we actually implement the work, and how do we fund it?
Okay, good. Thank you, Michael. And let's let Julie and the gang go at that one.
I love that because, yes, and that's such a kind of the backbone to the update, because, you know, a lot of jurisdictions have already done their studies. And so these guides are both useful for those that have done those, and how do we move forward and take those steps, and also for the ones that have not, go step by step. And so I'd be interested too, and to add on to that question, for those that had used it, which ones did they find more useful? Regional, you know, was it the regional specific or local area one, defining the local regional impacts? And because of those specific assessments, you know, was that more helpful? But in the fourth one, identifying adaptation strategies. So once you've identified your strategies as you have, part of this update too, then we'll go into hopeful great detail of the how do you move forward with these steps, and the funding availability, especially with, I know I can speak for the OES and FEMA funding. only there's a lot of other funding sources there, but we will be listing those sources and steps you can do. And I know with the recent fire declarations, that brings a lot of money into the state for these kind of adaptation strategies to move those forward. And so we have a whole process, at OES that we go through. And so we'll be outlining those steps and providing that information and resources to you, because that you can do all the planning in the world, but until you kind of get those boots on the ground projects going, that's where it's really going to make that difference. And so we need to move forward, help you move forward with your strategies so to lessen these impacts that we're seeing now, especially the extreme ones that are occurring right now. So we'll definitely help with that next step for you as well.
Thank you, Julie. I have a comment and a question really from the chat box. So one group saw that the date was 2012 on the adaptation planning guide, so they chose to use what were more recently dated documents to help them plan. So I guess a question there, instead of maybe putting the date on the front, maybe for this update, how are you planning to keep it kind of updated and relevant, or is this just a one-shot thing next year for 2019?
Well, this hasn't been updated since it was released in 2012, and actually the planning started, after the 2010 state mitigation plan. So it is dated document. And so that is part, we're open for that suggestion, because right now they're, a static document, and it was mandated to be updated based on the Safeguarding California and the legislation. So, maybe if it turns into an online version, can we update it would that be the review tool or a tool to utilize there? We can, continue to use the best available science and data that's out there. And so, we need to figure that part out right now. They're static guides, and they will be based on the update will be based on absolutely the newest climate science, and we have the safeguarding and fourth assessment and other research tools and data that we'll be using. But to move it forward, is it every year? We don't have the answer to that yet, and so throughout the process, help that.
Good, thank you. So another question from the chat box: will there be a financing chapter in the new APG?
And that's with the funding opportunities. I guess that's what that is talking about, and availability of funding. So absolutely, yes. And that's what we were talking about previously. And, for all of you out there that have gone through the process and are ready for funding, I just want to put a bug in your ear because of the recent fires and the declaration. They're already doing applicant briefings, and there will be a funding availability. So please be watching for that as well, because that's your opportunity to start that process for getting your application in for your project.
Great. Let's slide now, since we already are in the discussion, into this question B, the big question here. How would this new APG be most helpful to all of you that are doing adaptation planning on various issues, fire, sea level rise, water, and all here in the Bay Area? So what would be most helpful here to have in the APG? And again, you can put your answer in the chat box or unmute yourself and fire away at it.
Bruce, this is Jack Leapster from Marin County, and absolutely the financing and funding mechanisms will be very important. But I also want to call attention to another thing that would be very helpful, and that's how to plan in the very long term. And that's something that we're grappling with now, and we've taken the idea of adaptation pathways. What do you do in the short term? How do you add to that and not have to redo it in the next term and moving onward into the future? So it'd be very helpful if the APG would address and describe those kind of processes, perhaps maybe with several different typologies of pathways. Say, for example, you have an existing community and it's going to be threatened by waves and sea level rise. Like, when you put in a seawall, for example, when do you do that? What comes next? And carry that out for some of the more critical types of challenges that we're going to have in the coast.
Great, thank you, Jack. And a question from the chat box, Julie and Sarah and Adam. Who is the intended audience here? Is the APG primarily for new cities and counties that are just getting now to adaptation and just starting, or is it for more advanced counties? I mean, Marin has done a lot of work on sea level rise here. So has San Mateo that we've heard from this morning. Or are you trying to do, kind of different audiences with different part of the APG? Who are you aiming at here?
Well, I can speak. Originally, it was held for a resource tool for jurisdictions that haven't gone through that process or that didn't have a good understanding. Because again, back in 2010 through 2012, this was fairly new for a guidance document, to a step-by-step document as well. As we move forward, and we're already seeing on this webinar, there's some jurisdictions that have already gone through that process and they need guidance more on, okay, how do we get these projects funded and take this step and make sure that we're planning far enough out in the future, or near-term, long-term, mid-term, any of those areas. And then we'll also have the ones that, they need help just, getting a handle of all the resources out there. Which one are we to use? What's the state's guidance? And so it really is for both, and I hope that it remains for both, because the state has jurisdictions in all levels of planning, and so I hope it will be relevant in that one. I want to clear up one thing though, and it was back when we had started this, and I guess cleaning up if there is any confusion between adaptation and hazard mitigation, because I know back when we were developing these guides, there was a lot of confusion because mitigation and adaptation and mitigation could mean greenhouse gas reduction, and one meant hazard mitigation. And so we use hazard mitigation and adaptation as the same. And so when you see grants for hazard mitigation, understand please that is adaptation efforts. And so there's a lot of wording that different grants are specific for availability. And so we'll help you through that process in these guides as well, and just clarifying that. But when you see mitigation in the climate world, I think that still relates more to the greenhouse gas reduction efforts. In our world, in emergency management, hazard mitigation is climate adaptation, those long-term strategies. And so we'll help clarify that, but those key words with funding opportunities, will help you with that as well. But really, moving forward, we want to address where the jurisdictions are in their planning process, whether you've already begun it and you're looking at the next step. How do we implement this, or beginning? And so it makes it a useful document for all jurisdictions.
Great, thank you. Another question, a couple of related questions from the chat box, from Jasneet Sharma in San Mateo County. She says, moving forward, we need the APG to provide better guidance on the science as well. So maybe not just the step-by-step, but what science should we be using on various climate impacts, and also related to that needing more help or information about triggers and thresholds as to when we would have to implement a certain type of work to deal with climate impacts. So Julie, Sarah, and I'll answer on that one.
Great, and I mean that's what the adaptation planning guide is programmed after, and it's not just the step-by-step, but understanding. And that's with the 4 different documents, understanding your region and your local impacts and how those impacts are going to affect your community, and then developing those strategies. And so you have to have that science behind it. And so that's why, another reason for the update, because there has been so much more science and research done and new strategy development as well since the 2012 release of these guides. And so we want to incorporate that information, safeguarding all of the 4th assessments, anything we can find, and provide that clarification that this is what the state's recommendations of the data sets that you should be utilizing, and for consistency. Adam's got some other comments.
Hi, yeah, this is Adam Suckett. So on that note, one of the things that we're going to be working hard to develop and look forward to your feedback on is, in this guide, we don't want to recreate the science that's already out in the sources that Julie just mentioned, the 4th climate change assessment, Safeguarding California, other key sources of data. It's almost fire and fury out there with so much information, science, and new activities. And of course, it's in the news now with the new national report that just came out with the federal agencies. So one of the key focal points and goals of the Adaptation Planning Guide hopefully will be that hub of the wheel to be able to show where the science that you need to reference is located if it doesn't warrant being recreated inside this guide itself. So hopefully that'll be it'll help cut through some of the craziness of all of the activity and science out there, and help create an arrow towards what you need to know and where it's located without recreating it and duplicating it.
I think that's great, Adam, and let me just second that thought, or that approach, that we have really changed here in California since 2012. So the more this 2019 APG could be that hub. So we have CalAdapt, we have the Clearinghouse, we have SB 246, we have SB 379. We have a variety of things out there, which is great, that you're doing, that OPR is doing, that Resources is doing, but sometimes it's a little hard for people doing the work day to day to keep up. So the more that the hub could, or the APG could be that hub, that place to go to, maybe on the web, and to understand better what all the resources are from Sacramento and elsewhere, that'd be great. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, Bruce, I was just going to mention too, along with that is the communities too. There's so many overwhelming, legislations and everything else that they have to update for all these multiple different types of plans. And so we'll have to help assist with that. And so, you don't need to develop all these separate plans. A lot of that can be incorporated in your local hazard mitigation plan and get that into the general plan and all of these tie-ins. And so we'll make that tie-in for you. So, if you do this planning effort, it's going to meet this legislation requirement, because it is overwhelming for the jurisdictions, and we really want to help clear that up and provide that one place where, okay, this is all of those websites that you've mentioned, but I'm confused. How do we start? And know that we are using those tools, but putting it in one place to help you guide through that process.
Great, thank you. That's fabulous. I've put up on the screen, you can all see now the initial ideas, some initial ideas on content that Sarah went through earlier. So you can comment on any of these, or you can give us your own comment on something separate about the APG and moving forward. So unmute yourself and fire away with a comment here about any of these initial ideas, or about something else that you'd like to have OES hear about the APG, or use the chat box. But we're open for your oral comments right now. Just unmute yourself.
This is Jeremy Lowe from SFEI.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hi. So I had a comment. In the present setup, you have a vulnerability assessment which tries to understand how risk might increase with climate change. And then you have an adaptation strategy, which says how you might start reducing that risk by appropriate adaptation actions. What I don't see is a discussion about what the tolerable risk is that a community would accept. And at the moment, I see things like a lot of FEMA, 100-year, is that a 100-year floodplain and so on, getting to that standard. But is that appropriate for the Bay? I'm thinking about sea level rise here in the Bay. Is 100 years appropriate condition for San Francisco to protect itself, or for some of the larger infrastructure that we have, or is it appropriate for the housing areas? We don't have that discussion about what is tolerable risk or appropriate risk, and I'd like to see that. That would help a lot in planning adaptation strategies.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you. I think we can help along that, although we couldn't tell the jurisdiction what is your tolerable. I think that's through the planning process. You'll need to decide that, but we should be able to help guide those discussions for you. So thank you so much.
I think that's really great. If you could give some guidance on how a community or an organization or could evaluate, what is the level of protection that they need?
Good, thank you, Sarah. I think
I think that goes back to potentially like cost-benefit analysis and other analyses that communities can use to determine what is the level of risk that they're willing to have standing. So that's really great feedback to hear, and so we can explore more models and such that we can put in the guide to help with that.
Great, thank you. One from the chat box, a suggestion that it would be helpful to have examples or models of coordination among multiple jurisdictions, since particularly with sea level rise, but with other issues as well, fire we're finding on this one, to show good examples of how not just a city or a county is dealing with something, but how they're doing it across cities, across counties, across borders.
Yes, that's a great comment, and definitely we need to include more examples of that, because that communication, it's all about the communication and coordination, because it doesn't stop at boundaries, and so we need to be communicating and coordinating with partner jurisdictions and even cross sector, and making sure that we're compatible and working effectively together. So thank you.
Great, good one. Others, unmute yourself and fire away with a question or a comment. Again, if you were in charge of the 2019 APG, what would you like to see in it? What would be most helpful to you, or what do you think would be most helpful to cities and other jurisdictions that are just starting out on this?
This is Michael again from San Mateo County.
Hi, Michael.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to do a shout out, sort of follow up to the previous conversation. Was first of all, BayCAN is doing a great job of helping coordinate between the counties. So using if the state coordinates with regional bodies like that, San Mateo County, Marin have been working closely together. So I think there's some good examples of that in the Bay Area, which is an area we can speak to. The other thing is, I'm looking back at what slides you had enhancing graphics, I think, and that's where I would do a shout out to SFEI, who, and I know Warner and others are on the call right now, they do a lot of that work for us in the Bay Area. So again, not repeating things. If they've got graphics that are being used already, they're working on the operational landscape units and mapping that. There's potentially some resources you could use in the Bay Area. So just want to make those comments.
Thank you, Michael.
We do have the regional bodies like BayCAN and SFEI.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Sorry there. Just a general question to the group, Bruce, and you, is we've heard in some other forums a concept kind of leading off of peeling off of the comment that was just made about mentorship between jurisdictions. If one jurisdiction is much more advanced, would they be willing to be if you will, a best practices mentor, guide on the ground to assist another jurisdiction who can reach out to them? Is that something that has ever circulated with that type of discussion within the BayCAN network? Or is it something, or is it something that would be supported, that we could reflect some examples of that sort of approach, or encourage that in the APG?
I think that's a very good thing. BayCAN is fairly new, so 6 months now. So we haven't gotten to a mentoring program per se, but we are linking cities and counties and water districts and all together for kind of mutual benefit, and trying to do some matching around that right now. But I think the other ARCA collaboratives, certainly, that have been around a little longer, LARC, and the San Diego Collaborative and all would probably have some good examples of that. Sacramento as well. But I think, again, that's this is where it's a richer field, obviously, that the state are getting to work with now, but a more complex field than it was back in 2012 or so. So, in that way, again, being the hub and helping link people that are coming in from all over the state. They may not know about BayCAN, even if they're in the Bay Area, or about LARC in LA, or about the Capital Region Collaborative. So the more you can help aim people in the right way so that we can help them would be helpful. And I think we can set up that kind of mentoring in a more formal way. Other questions or comments here? It's wide open for you folks. We had one comment in the chat box that would be helpful if the APG would help communities, staff in particular, to make the case around why we need to be doing adaptation, or they need to be doing adaptation and resilience planning. So using the APG, if possible, to not only help people that are ready to do this, but to get maybe elected officials and others, or higher ups within the staff structure for a city or a county to understand why we need to be moving, and maybe moving at a faster pace. So that was another suggestion. But we're open, folks. Unmute yourself, and how would you like to see the APG help you or others?
Yeah, this is Julie. I just thank you so much for that comment, because it immediately brought to my mind the most recent fire declarations and flooding and all of that work that the state has been in for several years. It's just been back-to-back, disasters. And it's interesting too, back in when we first developed the APG, we didn't have emergency management as one of the sectors. And so we've come so far now to understanding that in emergency management, and that can help feed this, because your critical facilities, these that are being destroyed through these wildfires and mudslides and floods, that's the emergency management then is a huge component of that. And how are we dealing and having the capability to manage those disasters, and for your local jurisdictions, your special districts, flood districts, fire districts, they need to be looking at this, and do they have the capability to come back on, or maintain, or to even withstand those kind of effects, So we're seeing the increase already, where the fire season used to be, maybe a 9-month, where it's year-round now, and then you have the additional impacts. And so I think that, for speaking with legislators and the political bodies, we're seeing those impacts, and from the emergency management perspective, from ours as well. We're going to be building that up. That's in safeguarding. We help build that up, and in the Safeguarding California, that sector. And so we need to include that in the APG, obviously. And so I think that would help address with your political bodies those impacts that we're seeing, and it's continuing. And so I think that's a big push for that.
Great, thank you, Julie. On the slide that's on the screen right now, this was the list of some initial ideas on content that Sarah ran through at the beginning. Look at that second bullet, folks, and you've already given us feedback on some of these, but there's a fairly long list there of the kinds of resources that the APG could include. Do any of these jump out at you that haven't been mentioned or that you think would be really valuable to include, or kind of must-haves that you would have in the APG? So again, unmute yourself and give us an answer to that question, or give us some other feedback on where the APG ought to go.
Again, sorry, this is Michael from San Mateo County.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the cost-benefit analysis, I'd be curious if there's, Jeremy and I have been working on a subcommittee about the cost-benefit analysis of green areas, the marshlands, the parklands, and so forth. Will that be part of the future? I mean, because generally, when you apply for grants, it's, my understanding is that's not generally considered a part of the cost-benefit. So I'd be curious how sort of non-traditional areas are covered in that. Thank you.
That hasn't been totally fleshed out, but from Cal OES, for our grant programs, they focus on restoration of the natural environment. So that would definitely, marshes, wetlands are definitely going to be included in these cost-benefit analysis, and there will be encouragement to really take a look at the benefits of ecosystem services and how they will help protect your community. And yeah, that was a great question.
Good, and we can slide, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go for it.
We can slide over to question C here. We have a few minutes left here on the webinar. What plans are you working on that you would like the APG to really help with? And Julie talked about some of these at the beginning: general plans, local hazard mitigation plans, local coastal programs, for those of you under the Coastal Commission, climate action plan. What is it specifically that you're going to be doing in terms of a plan in the next few years that you'd like the 2019 APG to really help you with? Maybe a little feedback here, or again, a comment or a more general question.
Since someone else is jumping in, I will. This is Michael again, San Mateo. One thing that I've noticed working at the county is the people that create the local hazard mitigation plans are not the same people that are like on this phone call. And the climate adaptation people are generally disconnected from the hazard mitigation plan folks, because the people in the room there are, you know, fire chiefs, police chiefs, and so forth, great at reaction, but not great at adaptation and forward thinking. And I guess the one request I would have from Cal OES is, as these hazard mitigation plans are accepted by local communities, to ensure that the type of people that are on this call are pulled into the conversation and really encourage local organizations to pull in other departments and public works people as well, because the public works folks are the ones that are going to actually do stuff on the ground and build things. I've made that comment before, but I think it has not been happening as much as I think it should be, and I don't think that's unique to San Mateo County either. Thank you.
That is so great.
Yeah, this is Zoe.
Zoe, we're getting a little feedback from you there.
Okay.
Can you mute your no, it's not.
Okay, I'll just chat.
You're going to have to use chat function. So Julie, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think, you know, that is, it happens. More than, we'd like to hear that happens with all the different planning activities that are going on. And really, the local hazard mitigation plan, when you're updating it, it has to be updated every 5 years. And so that planning team is critical. As you know, probably for the ones that are on this call, planning is, one of the most important parts. You have to get the boots on the ground projects, but you have to have the right people at the table, and that includes having all of the emergency management, your climate, your district, it's got to be a comprehensive plan, and it actually needs to be when we're reviewing those. And so I think part of that planning team, really for your jurisdictions, make sure you have the right people, all the right people that it's going to affect, because the local hazard mitigation plan will affect your entire community, and should. It's not affect, but it should include all of your actions and identify strategies and your risks and hazards. And so it's not your emergency operation plan. This is your long-term planning document and adaptation planning document. So you want to include those, and we're requiring actually now, including, if we know your area is affected by a certain risk and we're not seeing that in there, your plan's not going to get approved. So you're going to need to include those, and we walk you through that process. But there's so many different planning activities going on, and they really need to be integrated, and that's the local hazard mitigation plans is a great place to do that, of course, and then adopting that into your general plan where everything does need to be consistent, so they are working together. So there's a lot of planning mechanisms out there, and it is the challenge. I'm not going to minimize that at all, but getting those right people at the table when you're doing your planning updates for various plans, that the multi-jurisdictional plan or local jurisdictional plan, can incorporate much of what you're doing in the others. And if they meet that criteria, that's great. And we have some kind of crosswalks that help guide that as well. If you're meeting this, does it meet, a coastal plan requirement or something? So we'll help connect those dots for you as well.
Julie, this is Bruce, and when we've heard this up and down the state in the work we did last year for the OPC on sea level rise, that often the folks we were talking to who were in sustainability or whatever parts of kind of the climate world within a city or a county were not being included in the local hazard mitigation plan, because that had been done for a long time by emergency services and police and fire and all. Are you suggesting to folks when they do their local hazard mitigation plans that they be more inclusive, or can you actually go further and require that? Because we're still getting feedback that this just isn't happening enough.
Yeah, we definitely, if the plan is funded through FEMA and we're administering that plan, even if it's not, but it's part of our standard practices to work with the communities from kickoff meetings all the way through. So we'll assist, and definitely we'll, be suggesting, do you have the right players, the full gamut of sectors and jurisdictions or players within that department. So yes, it is critical. If it's, kind of in a tunnel, it's not going to be the comprehensive plan that it needs to be. And so mandating, there's a list on FEMA of players that FEMA recommends. I don't know that it's mandated, but we definitely do push very, very hard for that and can assist. Maybe we need to do a better job maybe here with our planning folks to make sure at the kickoff, prior to your kickoff meetings, that you've got the right players, and we definitely assist you throughout that process. But I don't know if we're mandating right now, if we could do that, but we definitely will help, and we strongly recommend we've got to have your climate folks merged with the emergency management. And that kind of speaks to back when we did the APG, because we didn't include the emergency management in our document, the Adaptation Planning Guide back then. It wasn't a reality. It was happening what you're seeing with your planning folks there. It was, emergency management is separate. Well, we found, no, it's not. because when it doesn't get carried through on your other plans, emergency managers are going to come in and have to deal with that, and so it really needs to be integrated. And so it's a slow move, but we are moving through, as a state, doing that coordination. So, but I agree, it needs to happen more.
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, no, I'm just repeating what Bruce has said, and I see Zoe's comment as well. This is really key, and Julie, as you say, the more if it's not mandated, to highly emphasize it at the front end of the conversation, that they involve like the people on this call, because I had to force my way, find out where the meetings were when we were doing our hazard mitigation plan, and it was a struggle, and for me to even get myself at the table. And to me, there should be a broadcast to the local communities. Hey, we need people from planning. So anyway, I don't want to belabor that, but this is really crucial, that it's done at the front end, and in a perfect world, it's mandated at the front end. So
Thank you, Michael. Very important again. We've got just a couple minutes left. So last slide here. Any other feedback and guidance that you'd like Cal OES to hear this morning about their development of the APG? Either use the chat function or unmute yourself and give us your comment or your feedback. Okay, anyone else? Last call for comments or feedback. Okay, well, hearing none,
my last comment is, I just
Yeah.
want to say, before we end up, thank you for organizing this, Bruce. Thank you, Julie. Sorry if I'm sounding negative at all, but I think these kind of coordination meetings are great, and more of this is good. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. And look, thank all of you. And here on the screen right now are the emails for Julie and Sarah and Adam at Cal OES. All similar structure there to the emails, and mine as well. We appreciate you giving us an hour here out of your busy schedules to talk with Sarah and Adam and Julie. But further comments, please don't hesitate as they're working through this. Send them to me or send them via email. We did record this, so if you have others in your office that want to hear more about the APG, that's one way that they can do it. And let me turn it back to Julie and Sarah and Adam. Any final comments or final thank yous that you'd like to make here to the group?
Oh, absolutely. I just, these are so valuable to hear directly from all of you, and where your struggles are, and it shows the need then where we need to really kind of beef up the APG, and sounds like the coordination piece. I mean, that's always a struggle, but we can't give up on that. And just as an outside source, we have planners here, and as part of your local hazard mitigation plan process, where you're including these adaptation strategies and assessments and things, we're here to help you, and so you don't need to be battling your planning department and everything else. We're here to help, and but it really focuses. We can tell where the emphasis is needed, and so it's been so valuable, and we just thank you so very much for this. And we've got about a year-long process here, and so please be focused on where we're at in the process and continue with your comments, and and it helps guide us. So we just thank you so much. It's very valuable to us.
And the only other comment I would add, this is Adam, is just that there will be quite a few other times, avenues, mechanisms for comments on process and drafts as we work. Especially, it'll be a lot of activity, especially the first half of next year. And we'll be in contact through folks like Bruce and ICARP and other groups to make sure that you know about it.
And lastly,
Great.
for me, any questions on getting involved and want to kind of get the status, I'm person you can email. And also, if you have any questions about the various grant programs Cal OES has, you can also connect with me, and I'll send you information in that and connect you with your region's lead grant specialist. So,
great,
yeah.
Thank you. And we as BayCAN will keep up the contact between you all at OES and our BayCAN members here in the Bay Area. So as the process unfolds. So again, thank you, Julie, Sarah, Adam. Thanks for taking the time with us and giving us your ear and your thoughts as to how this go. We wish you the greatest, and we look forward to working with you over the next few months as you develop the APG and we help out. So thanks again to everyone, and we're signing off for now, but we will have more for you in the future on this important topic. Thank you very much, and have a good morning.
That's perfect. Thank you. Bye-bye.